Have you ever felt like you're constantly hitting a brick wall when trying to motivate your homeschooler? Are they bored? Are they uninterested? As someone who's been homeschooling for almost a decade now, I've encountered and overcome countless challenges when it comes to motivating my own children. I've done a lot of research on this topic, from reading books, from talking to other experienced homeschool moms, and even attending workshops on this very topic in the homeschool conferences that I have attended throughout the years. And I am excited to share with you so many things that I've learned. What are the common reasons behind a homeschooler's lack of motivation? What are some immediate steps I can take to counter this boredom and this disengagement? And how can I create a learning environment in my home that fosters excitement for my homeschooler? We're going to tackle all these questions and more in this video. My name is Rachel, and I have been homeschooling for almost a decade now. I have a 17-year-old, a 14-year-old, and a 10-year-old. And on this channel, I give lots of homeschool encouragement, lots of parenting encouragement, and all from a biblical perspective.
So picture it. Sicily, 1922. No, just kidding.
You can comment below if you know where that one's from. Picture it. You're sitting at the kitchen table, and you're trying to teach your homeschooler, but their eyes just glaze over, and they're staring off into the distance as if they are miles and miles away. They're struggling to pay attention. There's no spark. There's no twinkle in the eye. Wouldn't it be ideal if, while we're brewing our coffee, our kids are all excited to start the day and they rush to the homeschool table or to their desks because they can't wait to get started? Maybe even shouting out as we're walking to the homeschool room,
Mom, I finished my math worksheet. Do you have another one I could do?
That'd be great, wouldn't it? Before we label our kids as, oh, they must have a neurological disorder because they're not interested in school, or they're just lazy, let's consider some other things that could be going on here. One of the first things that could be going on here is their curiosity squelched? Let's say you're doing a math lesson. Maybe you got a kid who's super interested in science, but not so much in math. What can we do here? Well, let's say that during your math lesson, they are asking a random question.
How far is Mars away from the Earth?
You're trying to teach long division. We're not talking about Mars, but they have shown curiosity here. So maybe we say, okay, let's just take 5 minutes and we're going to quench this curiosity that they've brought up. We're going to appease them, but we're going to set a timer and we're going to look this up together, but they're going to promise, but then we're going to move on with math, right? You're showing that their questions and the things that they're curious about are important to you. How do we spark curiosity if they don't have questions? You ask the questions. Maybe you show your curiosity, or you ask the questions in a way that maybe you think they should be curious, or maybe it will send them down a road of curiosity. Make plans for exploring whatever topic you're on, whatever topic you want to pique their interest in or that they are interested in. If they are showing interest in a topic, again, the science, lean into that. Follow that rabbit trail. It may be a whole day where all you do is follow this one topic, and it's okay. What if one of the topics that fostering that interest in, what if you get some books from the library about it? What if you tell them as they're searching and learning about it, they need to read about it to their stuffed animals, or maybe even to their dog? Reading to the animals is something, there's something to that, because when we used to go to the library more than we do now, they would have a program for kids who are struggling readers to read to the dogs. I can't remember if they were like the animal shelter dogs or what, but bring in the live dogs for the kids to read books to them. And it also kind of gives them an opportunity to be the teacher. Same thing with younger siblings, like maybe you need a toddler who needs to be entertained. But the younger kids, give the older kids an opportunity to teach the younger ones about this very topic. If you have a whiteboard in your room, or even if you don't have a formal whiteboard, but you could write it down in a notebook, maybe if they have random questions that you would like to rabbit trail on, but now is not the time, write it down. Write it down in a way where they can see, I hear you, I hear your question, and we are going to tackle that. a little bit later though, and it gives them something to look forward to. Make time for the daily reading. When we did My Father's World, we had a book basket. So whatever science or history topic we were learning on that week, I went to the library and I got all kinds of books and DVDs, documentaries, audiobooks, whatever resources on that topic, and they would go into a basket. And that basket was just the smorgasbord that my child could choose from. He didn't have to read all those books, but whatever was in there when it was book basket time, he had to choose from those things, and he always found something he was interested in. Make sure you are modeling the curiosity for your children. If they appear disinterested, maybe you need to be a little extra excited about it, and you need to be interested, and you need to follow some rabbit trails for yourself. And then ask God for ideas. Our Creator made us. He knows us better than we know ourselves. He definitely knows our children, and He knows what they need to be motivated. So take it to Him. It's amazing how He can plant ideas in our heads sometimes. The next thing that could be unmotivating your child, stress and anxiety. I think that this is one maybe we often overlook as parents because we're the ones that are stressed all the time. Mom's the one that's anxious about all the things that she's got to do. Our children can feel stressed too. Stress is basically a reaction to a lack of control that we feel. So for example, does your child crave structure? But it's not your thing. My oldest child definitely craves structure. If I say we're starting school at 8:30 and I'm like at 9 o'clock, he just doesn't know what to expect, and that definitely bothers him. Maybe you crave structure, but your child not so much. I definitely have that also, where I'm more structured than another one of my children. So we need to have, here's our plan for the day. For the very structured child, make sure they have a plan. If you're not ready to start at 9 o'clock, maybe there's something that they can start, and you can have a plan in place where you start working on this. Maybe it's a little 15-minute task, and you sit at the table, and if I'm not ready at 8:30, you'll have one thing checked off your list. Also, a schedule put up on the board so your child can see at these times we are going to move on to the next thing. Some people aren't for those time-blocked schedules. They like to just go with the flow. But if you have a very structured child and maybe you're trying to do some things together, family-style learning, and they get their part done first, they might need to know at what time are we moving on to the next thing, and they'll take a break. They'll go outside, jump on the trampoline, or maybe they'll do some other independent work. I know for my son, he would like to know, are we moving on in 15 minutes? Because if so, I'm not going to start a math lesson that's going to take me 45 minutes to an hour. Another thing that can help your child if they are feeling especially stressed, and whether you know it or not, because I have a child who will tell me that they're feeling stressed out. Deep breathing. It really does work. I have an Apple Watch. It's not on my wrist right now, and it has a breathing app on it. And I have actually used it when I have felt nerves. And I did that breathing app, which basically just is kind of like a timer to breathe in and then breathe out, and then breathe in and then breathe out. And it really did calm me down. And then another thing that can help your child if they are stressed and anxious are lollipops. Who knew? Blow pops, any kind of suckers, dum-dums. The act of just sucking on those things can help you get anxiety out. It's almost like the lollipop is a fidget type thing, but certain fidget toys also, if they're quiet, right? Another thing that our child that may be affecting their motivation is if they're not struggling. The struggle is a motivator. If their school is boring them because maybe they are advanced, they're past this, they want to be challenged. The challenge is a motivation. When they do overcome a challenge, make a big deal about it. That was a hard thing. Have a little celebration. Maybe I used to have like a bulk thing of Skittles or a bulk thing of M&Ms that we would use for manipulatives for math. But if they did something hard, or I asked them to, pass a time math test, or, maybe they didn't miss any of their language arts grammar practice that day, I might give them a small handful of the candy as a little, you did it, let's celebrate. And then they may want to challenge themselves more. Actually, when my youngest did the Good and the Beautiful language arts, they would often have little games with grids where you had to practice reading words or something. And she loved putting the little skittle on each word. So when she read it or whenever she did whatever activity, she could eat one. So even if it was like correcting grammar on a sentence, she might put a little skittle next to each sentence. So every time she did one, she ate a skittle. But if all you do is praise them and say, you're awesome, you did it, you're so good at math, even when they're not, that may not motivate them at all. That may demotivate them, because then it's like, Mom, it doesn't matter what I do, everything's the same. It's like getting a participation trophy. When did we get into those participation trophies? I grew up in the era where we wanted to get first place, and I had a lot of trophies as a kid. Now my kids have taken all my trophies because they think they're so cool, because they say first place or second place or third place on them. They didn't just say thanks for participating, like all the medals that they've gotten through the years. Teach your kids how to fish. Don't just hand them the fish, make them struggle. If they're on their own, maybe they will discover what they need to learn. I have found this with my daughters so many times when trying to teach them math concepts. I will often try to give them little hints and tricks that work for my brain, but they don't always work for theirs. And my daughters have actually told me, here's what works for me. If they didn't have to struggle and figure that out, then they would have never learned that. Maybe they need some critical thinking type things. They need like a daily challenge, like Wordle. We've also used this game from when I was in high school. I don't know if they still sell it. If they do, I'll link it below. But it's called Mind Trap, and it's like these little logic challenges. We've done a few of them in our morning time. Sometimes they're really difficult for my kids to figure out, and other times they're just really quick. So maybe take 5 minutes per day to challenge their mind in that way. Let them take ownership of their problems. One of their subjects, maybe you don't check it till the end of the week, but they're supposed to do a little bit every day. And maybe they fell behind. Well, have them figure out, how are you going to do this? Are you going to do homework at night? Are you going to do homework on the weekend? Because here is your deadline, and you better figure out how to solve this problem. My son, when our first year of homeschooling, and he was in 3rd grade, he wanted to try not doing math daily. He wanted to try doing all of his same subject in one day. So like maybe Monday was language arts. Maybe Tuesday we did all the science for the week. Maybe Wednesday he did all the math for the week. And I let him try it. During the math lessons that he was doing where he was just sailing along, I mean, why not? He found, though, that when it came to certain math challenges where he needed more practice or he didn't quite understand it, that doing 5 lessons in one day was not ideal. But they need to figure that out on their own. So if you have a child struggling with motivation, maybe it's time for you, Mom, to start setting limits for yourself. Start letting go of some things and challenge them and see what they can do. Another reason maybe your child is struggling with motivation is they do, in fact, have a challenge like ADHD, which is very common for ADHD people, which that's such a broad spectrum. I mean, an ADHD person's issues down here may be very different from up here. I think that they might just throw a lot of people's challenges into the ADHD hat. But I have found with my daughter, executive function is definitely something that challenges her. And so she might need my help. I have to let her figure it out, what is going to work for her. And I am there for support. I'm there to help give her ideas on what she could try, but she's figuring out on her own with my support. ADHD children often have trouble controlling their emotions. They definitely have trouble with time management. This is one that we've ran into. Maybe they're 15 years old chronologically, but in terms of their development for these types of things, they're like an 11-year-old. So be patient with them and just keep teaching them. I sit with my daughter in the same room. We've started homeschooling up here. You can see this table behind me, but I have a computer here, which is what I'm looking at right now. That way I can get some work done while she's maybe working on something that she could be independent, but I'm right here. So I can make sure that she's doing it. And maybe even when she starts whatever homework where I think it might be challenging to her, I will sit right next to her as she does the first few problems to make sure that she gets it, to make sure she understands it. So maybe you tell your child, I'm going to be here for the first 5 minutes, but our goal is maybe next week I'm only going to stay here for 4 minutes. And maybe the next week I'm only going to be here for 3 minutes. We're going to try to get this down to 1 minute. Their frontal lobe, which is the logic portion of the brain, is not fully developed yet. ADHD children, they say that it develops at a much slower rate. Now, my daughter is 14 years old, and so I'm going to give you some hope. If you do have an ADHD child, she's totally growing out of some of these things. Even if your child struggles with this when they're young and they're developing at a slower rate than other children, they really will figure them out, and they'll figure out what works for them, and they will slowly become more independent. ADHD kids and adults too, probably, right, have a very poor concept of time. And so when I went to the homeschool conference last year and went to the workshop on this topic, they suggested a very specific timer. I'm going to link this one below also. The red is a visual of, oh, I've got a lot of time versus my time is running out. And they have said this particular timer works very well for ADHD students. I've also talked about in my supplies video that I bought my daughter this bookmark timer for when she would go read. It was always in her book. She would set the little timer for 20 minutes and then she could visually see how much time she had left. But her reading time was time boxed with that bookmark, and that worked out great for her. Another reason kids may be reluctant learners, and this is a big one and kind of a growing problem in my opinion, and that is video games in media. We can tell that when they've had too much video games, too much screen time, their attitudes change. We have got to set boundaries on them, time limits, make them exercise. That's what I tell my kids. You've got to exercise a different part of your brain. We are turning off all the devices. We're turning off the TV. You're going to do an art project. You're going to go ride your bike. You have to do these things. In fact, during the school day, I have boundaries set where even if they're done with their schoolwork at 12 o'clock, they can't just go into the basement and watch TV. The TV remains off until 4 p.m. unless we're watching a very specific educational type thing. And my kids are not allowed to play video games during the school week. That is for weekends only. Video games they're gratifying to kids because they're like little micro achievements. It feels like they've done a lot when they've really done nothing. I mean, when they look at this Minecraft world that I built, I mean, think about all the time and effort they put into building that world. But in reality, what is that world? Now, I'm not saying like, don't let your kids play this at all, because I do think there's an element of creative play with video games. We just have to be watchful of it consuming them. Keep in mind too that with video games and with television, you're getting visual and auditory return to your brain with very little effort. It's literally making us dumber. That's what I keep telling my husband. We were talking with my parents came over for my son's birthday this week, and my dad was telling me how when he grew up, they didn't have 24-hour TV. It was like maybe your TV came on at 5 o'clock and it was off by 9. Like that was all your TV for the day. They didn't even have the option of watching all day. And look what we've got now. We have 24/7 with endless options to watch. I mean, even when I was growing up, I didn't have cable. We lived out in the country. I didn't have access to cable. So I was forced to think creatively. I was home. I didn't have kids in my neighborhood either. So I was really a bored child. And it forced me to think creatively to entertain myself, because even if I wanted to sit around and watch TV all day, there was nothing on. And there were no DVD players. I had a VHS player. Even when I was really, really young, we didn't have that many VHS tapes to entertain us. I mean, it was like Friday night was the night you went to the video store, and it was an exciting night because we could pick something new to watch. Times have changed, and our culture it's such a temptation with these things, but these temptations are literally making us dumber. So what's the motivation to think creatively and learn about something new when we can just have it constantly fed to us, constantly have it fed to the reward center of our brain? We're constantly being rewarded with no effort. So again, gaming and technology isn't always negative, but if your child is addicted to it, it can impact relationships. Definitely attitudes, right? what could we do here? You could have a contract with your child where you guys set boundaries, your children understand them and agree to them. You determine what the consequences of breaking that is. They'll be a little bit more vested into setting these boundaries if they have a little bit of a say in them. Model moderation ourselves. Maybe during the homeschool day, you need to set your phone on the kitchen counter so that it's not even close to you for a temptation. At night, after dinner, when we're sitting there relaxing or we're trying to enjoy each other's company or we're playing a game together, don't pull out your phone and start checking your email in front of your kids. My kids are the first ones to call me and my husband out, even though I'm like, I'm trying to respond to emails. To them, they're like, what is the difference between you being on your phone and me being on the iPad? Plan for involvement in the real world. Give them another reason to not want to be on screens. Plan for the nature walks. Plan for service projects. Make them run errands with you. Go to visit grandma and grandpa. Craft projects. Like I'm constantly reminding my daughter, you can paint, you can make bracelets, you can draw, you can write a creative story. Like I've given my daughters lots of creative ideas because again,
I was a very bored child.
So those ideas are still in my head. I've mentioned this before, but my daughters kind of pull to the technology, right? Like kids they figure this stuff out so much faster than I do. I have a technology degree, you guys. My college degree is in information systems. I took computer coding classes. I learned about all this stuff, and I still have to ask my kids questions when I have an issue with my phone. They somehow know how to figure this stuff out faster. And so because of that, certain homeschool curriculums I cannot use with one of my children, because if I let them sit in front of a computer all day, I can't sit there with them all day. And I don't want to manage like all the controls on the computer. It's more than I want to manage, okay? Because of that, there's certain curriculums that I've stayed away from. One of them being a certain math curriculum that I've talked about. And so I've recently switched to Learn Math Fast, which also just happens to be a very good curriculum for a child with ADHD, in my opinion, because it is so simple. It is just to the point. And that's what my child wants. So what can you do, Mom, if there are constant interruptions during the day? So maybe you have a learner who's only unmotivated in this one subject, but super curious about something else, or they just are so disinterested in anything that you're trying to present to them that they're going to only interrupt and talk about things that they're interested in. So at this homeschool conference that I went to, the speaker, who just also happens to be a specialist for special needs children, she gave this really great idea for this game. She called it Rocket Race. There are two columns, one for the child, and so like if you have a whiteboard, put this on there. One for the child and one for the teacher. You can determine, how big your rocket is. I just made 4 boxes here for this illustration. The goal is that if you're teaching a subject and your child interrupts, I get to fill in a square here for my rocket. You interrupted me. This is a race. Whoever fills their rocket first gets a reward. So if your child lets you get to a certain point in the lesson without interruptions, then they get the reward. So you can determine what these points in time are for filling in this. It could be, if you don't interrupt me for 15 minutes, you get a box filled in, or if you want, you could make it the whole lesson. Maybe make for each of the subjects you go through. It's up to you and whatever's going to motivate your child, right? And so if you get to keep moving along and your child just is such a good boy all day and gets their whole rocket filled up for whatever the parameters were, they get a reward. Maybe they get an extra 15 minutes of recess, an extra 15 minutes to sleep in the next day. Whatever it is you've determined to be the reward. If you win, they get a consequence. What is the consequence if you fill it up because of their constant interruptions? You can determine that. But they said this one's a really good one for constant interrupters. The key to using rewards and consequences as a motivator is they need to be immediate sometimes. So don't say, oh, if you did really good on your schoolwork today, we're going to go to the Great Wolf Lodge sometime next year. That time way out when it's probably not going to work. They are going to need an immediate reward, like the 15 minutes extra outside, or a handful of Skittles, or you can sleep in tomorrow. And the same thing with consequences. Don't say you're going to get in trouble as soon as your dad gets home. The consequence needs to be immediate. Some other ideas for immediate rewards is you get to choose dessert tonight, or, maybe you set aside the science lesson for the day and you get to play with your Legos. Let's just admit it. Legos is still a good learning activity. But the rewards and the consequences need to be understood, and they need to be meaningful to the child. They need to be logical to the child. I found this with my children too. Like, I tried to give them a reading challenge one year where if you read so many pages, I was going to give them $100 at the end of the year. And they were motivated for about a week. But it was like the end of the year was so far off and the amount of pages was so huge. It was just like, ask your child what would motivate them. What would be a good consequence? Actually pay attention, because your child's probably not going to tell you what a good consequence is. But I know my children are motivated by video games, and they're motivated by play dates with their friends. I did a video last year on this star chart that we use that actually works out pretty well. I already explained it in a video. Check it out right here. For more content like this, homeschooling, hints and tips, inspiration, this playlist right here. Until next time.